All right, everyone. Last night, Project Veritas was actually doing video drops during the midterms themselves. Now, this didn't accomplish anything voting-wise. They'd already hit all the critical states. And indeed, Project Veritas probably the #1 winner of the night. The Republicans need to kiss ring at this point because James O'Keefe is the only person willing to put his neck out and do investigative journalism on their behalf. He's the only person really doing that in a partisan sense, so they really need to recognize his efforts at exposing the corruption of their opponents. Because the Republicans, a lot of them, they're too cowardly to do that. They won't even talk about it. They won't even bring up the possibility that their opponent is crooked because they're afraid of it blowing up in their face. They're afraid of being browbeaten with some fucking wedge issue bullshit, quips or something like that. Project Veritas, though, doesn't give any shits, and so has actually helped them along. They were dropping last night, apparently, a clip of some Beto staffers. Now, of course, I think they already released a Beto staffer video anyway, in which they were talking about how they had tons of illegal immigrants voting for them. Now, of course, Ted Cruz ended up winning. I think the general consensus among a lot of people was that Cruz was in trouble. I never said that. I correctly predicted Cruz would be reelected. Beto being up in early voting there was hilarious because like everyone under the sun's like, oh my god, we're going to lose Texas. And for a brief moment there, I was actually hopeful that would happen. I was hoping that Ted Cruz would narrowly lose re-election and that the Republicans would pick something else up. And indeed, it looks like they may have picked up Montana, which is not exactly but it still ends up at 54 because Nevada appears to have gone the other way. So the quirky states were out west. All the others basically fell in line with my predictions for the most part, and even the margins. I can't wait to do the analysis there. But Project Veritas releasing this. That should probably be investigated. I think someone was claiming last night in chat that Abbott was already aware, Greg Abbott, their governor, and was pledging to investigate that possibility. Now, we've got to understand something, and this is the case with most of Veritas releases. In most part, it's like with Gillum. Gillum's not on camera saying, oh yeah, basically I just use the poor, hey, I have racist views. No, but one of his staffers did. That's very bad for a campaign, especially when that staffer happens to be also kind of a personal friend of that candidate, as was the case with Gillum. With Beto O'Rourke, you have several staffers saying, oh yeah, it's like thousands of illegal immigrants are voting for us. The fact that the polling aggregate is widely different, the fact that in only Texas is the aggregate was it apparently more in favor of Republicans by several points. Everywhere else, it looks like overall it unduly favored the Democrats a little bit. Shows me that there is possible rigging, indeed, in the Texas vote. Just apparently not enough, because Ted Cruz, according to any statistical model, should have been riding on 5 to 7. Instead, I think he's ahead by like, 2.5, 3 points by now. That would point to possible voter fraud. And indeed, if you've got staffers openly proclaiming that is actually going on and saying, yeah, I got thousands of people who signed up. They're not allowed to vote, but I mean, there's no national ID, so who fucking cares? That could be a little bit of a problem, yeah. And you've got to understand something, and I've said this for a number of years. Voter fraud is not a systemic issue, but when you have a close race, you do have a reason why a political movement would want to use voter fraud. It's a risky move, so you wouldn't do it. You wouldn't go to Wyoming and say, hey, you know what? We're going to rig like 100,000 ballots, try to turn Wyoming blue. Nobody will be suspicious at all, because that's not going to happen. But in a race like that, with Cruz versus Beto, people are expecting it to be close. I think Beto's interior polling probably showed maybe a better result than the aggregate anyway, which turned out to be true, fraud aside maybe. There's definitely a reason why you would want to use a little bit of voter fraud. Sign up some dead people, sign up some people that aren't eligible. They're felons, they're illegally in the United States, or they're only like residents, they're not citizens yet. Anything like that, and it could become definitely a problem. And when you've got a large immigrant community, of course, in a place like Texas, maybe more important. It's like up here. What are you doing? The biggest immigrant community in Vermont, believe it or not, is Bhutanese. That's the main source. A bunch of Bhutanese refugees came here years ago during one of their ethnic purges, or Nepalese or something like that, during one of the ethnic purges up there in the mountains. And it's actually very funny. It's like, hundreds of people, which by Vermont standards is a lot. But Project Veritas, big winner of the night, #1. #2, dropping more tidbits about Texas. I wouldn't be surprised if James O'Keefe keeps dropping things for a while. Because they're probably, these are like the sloppy second sort of videos now that are that were in maybe less important states. Like a state where the Republicans are already 5 points ahead, probably not as much a priority. But they knocked out McCaskill. They knocked out Donnelly. In part, of course, his gaffe during the debate probably sealed his fate anyway. That's why you have almost a 10-point margin there. Like none of the polls showed the margin you're seeing in Indiana. So it's a combination of the two. Veritas hit him a day after his debate performance. He got knocked out by that. McCaskill down a couple points, lost Missouri. That's been called. It looks like Rick Scott managed to barely maintain Florida. And again, that's the trickle-down effect from the Gillum video. We see Gillum appears to have lost 5 or 6 points of support. Some of that trickled down to the Scott versus Nelson race. He literally saved the Florida Senate slot for the Republicans. And then Arizona, too. Of course, with Sinema getting hit, so Razorfist probably today celebrating. But yeah, it was an interesting night. Now it's time for a midterm recap, which will be longer, and then I've got to preserve my voice till later. That's about all. Peace out.